Today we got kind of a fun topic. We're going to go over a lot of different buffing pads. I will try to do a brain dump and share as much information about the pads, when you'd use them, how you'd use them, but also in some cases some of the history behind the pads. So some of you may not know this, but Meguiar's actually invented the foam buffing pad, and they introduced it in 1965. I happen to have one in my antique car wax collection. I donated it to the American Muscle Car Museum. And actually, just let me back up. Meguiar's didn't invent it. A gentleman by the name of Walter Cotton. Walter Cotton, I think he lived in Indiana. He invented the first foam pad, and Meguiar's bought the rights to the pad from him. And I actually had the good fortune of having lunch with Walter Cotton before he passed away. And this was back in 1989 in Newport Beach, California, where we went to what's called a Train of the Trainers class conducted by Meguiar's. At the time, I was an outside sales rep and trainer for Meguiar's. I covered Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. It was a lot of fun. And I got a story about one of my adventures while I was calling on body shops. My job basically was to call on body shops, detailer shops, and dealerships. And of course, just introduce at that time the Meguiar's line. And one of the things that was unique about it is I called on a lot of shops. You know, I covered 3 states, and a lot of times I would show these folks a foam buffing pad. And I worked at that time from 1987 to I think about 1990. And it's hard to believe, but back in 1987, you call in a body shop where they do paint work, or a detail shop, or a dealership, and a lot of these folks had never seen a foam buffing pad. So it was an easy sell for me, because that means everything they were buffing, if I just walk over here and grab this, everybody was using wool pads on rotaries. And so that means everything was being swirled out. So when you call in a shop, a dealership, or a body shop, and you show them a way to buff with something that has a uniform surface texture, and of course quality abrasive technology, and leave a more flawless finish, of course everybody wants to buy one. But anyway, so it was Meguiar's that they didn't invent it. Walter Cotton invented it, but Meguiar's introduced it in 1965. Anyway, because I introduced this with the Meguiar's original foam pad, and back then those foam pads were really thick. They made 3 basic pads. They made an 8-inch yellow foam polishing pad, and I think the foam was about 1.25 inches thick. It may have been 1.5 inches, but I think 1.25 inches is pretty close. And then they made 2, what they called the W500 and the W5500, and one of these had a 5/16 stud coming out of the back to put that on an air DA sander to turn your DA sander into a polisher, and the other one had a rotary 5/8 hole in the back and a thread, so you could put the 5-inch or the 8-inch onto a rotary polisher. And of course, at that time, I think that was just about the time where both Griot's Garage and Meguiar's were introducing the Porter Cable as their own branded DA polisher. So a little bit of history there. Anyway, so I'd like to do a shout out to Michael Stoops. Michael Stoops there at Meguiar's. I reached out to him. I asked him if he would send me some pads for this video, and he's very accommodating. And let me just kind of walk through and show you what they have here. Now, this is interesting because what I want you to try to see, and I'll hold up a yellow pad, is look how thin these pads are. Okay, so remember, Meguiar's first foam pads were very thick. In fact, I used to have the complete collection of what was called the Meguiar's, I hate to do the air quotes, but the detailers line. They had a pink, a tan, and I forget the other color. There's 3, yellow, so the yellow, pink, and tan. And these were in their original, when they launched, they didn't have a detailer line for years, but they launched in the 2000s. And they had these 3 pads to go with the chemical line. It was the same basic pad as the original W1000, W5500, and W500. So it's the same thickness, it's just different colors for color matching to the chemicals they used back then. But at some point, they started making these, they call these foam buffing discs. And they're very thin. I think they measure right in at 7/8 of an inch thin. And there's a reason behind that. The thicker pads simply did not rotate as well on simple tools back then, again, like pull this over here, like the Porter Cable. And here's why. When you have a thick pad on a free spinning random orbital polisher, one of the things is the foam, it's got so much mass, it tends to absorb the energy coming out of the tool and dissipate it. And this shows up to our eyes as weak or slow or anemic pad rotation and pad oscillation. And the problem would get worse as the pad became wet with product. So every time you add a little compound to the pad, buff a panel, turn it over, add a little compound or polish to the pad and buff a little bit, pretty soon that pad gets wet with product, and now the tool would really struggle because you got this thick pad full of liquid, and it would really struggle to maintain pad rotation. The cure back then was, of course, to switch to a dry pad, and you'd see rotation and oscillation come back up. But at some point, in fact, let's see, I think I wrote down, Meguiar's foam buffing discs were introduced in the year 2014 because Jason Rhodes sent me some to test out, and I wrote a review. I actually detailed a Camaro with them and then showed how great these pads were. But anyway, so these pads come in the maroon cutting pad, they come in the yellow polishing pad, and then they come in a black finishing pad. So a very simple line, but a very capable line. And since we're on the topic of these colors, let me just kind of knock out this topic. A lot of people have always asked, why don't all the people that make foam pads have a universal color code? The problem is that genie's been let out of the bottle for decades, and it ain't ever going back in. So everybody has their own color code. And even like, I remember Lake Country, I have a Lake Country orange open cell pad down here that's a polishing pad. And then Lake Country had a blue foam waxing pad, but in their Hydrotech line, that was a cutting pad. So even among brands, a single brand, they had the same colors for different types of pads. So it's too complex, it's never going to fix. And so what I tell people is, look, if you get to the point where you're going to get into machine polishing, you're buying a polisher, and now you're ready to buy some pads, the best thing to do is to do your own research. There's a lot of great Facebook groups out there where you can ask questions and do your own research, and then that'll help you to get the right pad for the thing that you want to do, whether it's compounding, finishing, machine waxing, whatever it is. Anyway, so those are the pads that Meguiar's currently has in their pad offering. They come in 6-inch, which is technically 6.5-inch. So one of the things, like this backing plate, this Velcro back here is about 6 inches, it's a little under 6 inches in diameter. And the reason for that is when you go to place a pad onto a backing plate, the Velcro either has to be exact or just a little bit undersized so you can visually see how to center it. If it's undersized, then you can't see where you're at and you'll get your pad on crooked. So when people give you the measurement for the pad, usually the pad diameter is just a little bit under what it actually claims to be. But anyway, so we got we've got a 5-inch and a 6-inch, so that covers most orbital polishers. And then they also have these power polishing pads that can actually be attached to a drill or on a smaller backing plate and used on things like DAs and rotary buffers. So that's pretty cool. They got a nice set of pads. They work great. They hold up really well. And it's a simple line. It's not going to be really hard to figure out which pad to use where. So on that topic, before we leave, a lot of people, back to the color coding, they can't figure out what the pad is because they don't know what the colors mean. So here's a simple way to do it. When you have a pad, take your clean hand and a dry pad and just rub it across the face of the pad. And this is a maroon, it's a very aggressive cutting pad, and I can feel a sharpness there. Okay, so it's a cutting pad. And if I go to compress it between my hands, it's very stiff. That's another indicator of a foam cutting pad. Now, if we move down the line, so if I come to this yellow polishing pad, I do the same thing. I run my hand across the face of it. I can still feel a little cut, but it's nowhere near as sharp or aggressive as the maroon pad. And of course, if I go to compress it, it compresses a lot easier. So this tells me this is a polishing pad. And then when we come down here to their black foam finishing pad, this is so soft, and Nancy loves this. This is so soft that, in fact, this morning I used it to put my makeup on.
I never heard that before.
And then if I go to compress it, it compresses very easy. So this is a soft foam finishing pad. So that's kind of the gist about the Meguiar's 3 different colors foam polishing pads. Now over here, I've got their foam or their microfiber discs, and I have 2 of them. I have the cutting in 6-inch and 5-inch, and I got the finishing pads. And the interesting thing that a lot of people may not know, and I feel bad, I meant to reach out to a longtime friend of mine. His name is Claude Sauvigny. This gentleman is an expert detailer. He's got to be one of the best that ever lived. And he's actually the guy that invented these for Meguiar's for use at the OEM level, or in other words, at the manufacturing plant where they build the cars. And what they did is they needed a way, because manufacturing a car is very high speed. And as the cars travel down the assembly line, if they saw a defect, there would be someone there that would mark it with like a grease pencil. Then at some point it's pulled off to the side to what's called a polishing deck. And they were usually just like 3-inch pads. And someone had a little air polisher and they just put a little product on there, fix it, wipe it off, it looks good, put it back on the assembly line, and let it run down. But the reason they brought out this microfiber pad for the assembly line was because they needed something that would both cut and finish and do it fast. And so that's kind of the roots behind the microfiber pad. It was actually something invented by a gentleman out of Canada, Claude Sauvigny. Meguiar's, he worked for Meguiar's at the time, so I think they owned the rights to it. And they sat on that. It was at the OEM level for years, and they didn't introduce the microfiber pad DA polishing system till I think somewhere around the year 2000 or 10 or 11. Then just let's do a little deeper dive here. Why microfiber? Why did Meguiar's introduce the microfiber pad to the detailing industry? Well, here's why. Because traditionally, a lot of your production work and work done at auction sites is done with the wool pad on a rotary. And of course, we all know that leads to holograms and burning through edges, sometimes twisting paint, things like that. So what Meguiar's was trying to do, and their intentions are very noble, is what they wanted to do is they wanted to switch the industry off of rotary buffers and wool pads and switch them over to DA or dual action polishers. And originally Meguiar sold, again, they sold the Porter cable. I remember they used to put a little badge sticker that's in Meguiar's. Griot's Garage did the same thing. And then later on, Meguiar's actually designed their own version of the Porter cable, so it was their own branded tool. Same action, 8mm free spinning random oral polisher. But when they introduced this, the goal was how can you take people that are used to using a powerful rotary with the big old wool pad and get the same kind of correction out of a much weaker tool? And the way they did that is they used fibers, okay? So you always got to keep in mind fibers when it comes to buffing pads are a form of abrasive. So you have your compound, your polish, they have abrasives. You have your AIOs or your all-in-ones, or in the old days they called it a cleaner wax. These typically have some kind of abrasive technology. And by creating this fiber pad for a free spinning random orbital polisher, an 8mm short stroke tool, you increase the cut of whatever compound or polisher you're using because these also accentuated or cut the paint. But that's kind of the history behind where the microfiber pads came from. Meguiar's did this to help change the industry to create more customer-pleasing results and get all these holograms out of the paint that was just so common back in, well, they're still common today, but common back in that day. They have two different ones. They've got the one, and you can see there's a maroon foam interface between the fibers and the Velcro, and over here is a black one, a black foam between the two faces. And of course, this one's a little shorter foam. This is a little thicker foam, so this has a little more cushion. It decreases the aggressiveness of it, so this is cutting, and then this would be polishing. So that's kind of a little history about the Meguiar's microfiber DA system, and of course their foam pads. Now, kind of related to that, one year when I was calling out a body shop in Springfield, Oregon, and this would probably be like 1988, I called in a shop, and again, just to kind of repeat this, a lot of shops I called on had never seen a foam buffing pad. All they knew was wool on rotary. So it was really easy for me to kind of get in the door and show everything in the Meguiar's line by opening with this foam pad and talking about how it would leave a more uniform swirl-free finish than anything with a fiber like a wool pad. So I call in the shop and I pull this pad out and I show it to the guy, the owner of the shop, and he looks at me like I'm from Mars and he goes, "Oh, we tried those, they don't work." So I asked him, "Well, what do you mean?" And he goes, he goes into his shop and he pulls out, this is some camera case liner. Okay, this is actually out of Yancey's camera case. He pulls out a chunk of this, he cut a circle in it, and then he said he tried buffing with it with water and it didn't work. So he completely convinced himself that foam would not work. But that's ridiculous. You know, first of all, if you're going to cut your own out of foam, you know, this egg crate convoluted foam, at least use it with the polish, not water, to give it a fair test to see if it would work. But anyway, I really had a hard time convincing that guy that a foam pad was going to work. But the more interesting thing about that visit was the 3M rep showed up. So I'm the Meguiar's rep, I got a 3M rep, we're both trying to convince them our products are the best. And as I'm holding this Meguiar's foam pad, the 3M rep looks at me and says, "Those things will never work." Okay, because at the time, 3M did not have a foam pad out. About a year or two later, they introduced their their waffle or convoluted foam pad. So that's kind of the history of where this pad came from. But I just thought it was funny. I was just in the right place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time, and I can remember all this stuff to this day. And just let me talk about this. I was talking to Chris Racana, who used to be our director of success. He's moved on to Lake Country Buffing Pads, a good mix for them. And we were talking about pad designs. So Meguiar's, most of their pads historically have always had a flat surface to them, a flat face. And so when 3M introduced this convoluted or this waffle or egg crate style foam, I looked at this and I go, why would you bring that out? Because as you push on this, it's going to flatten out and become a flat pad anyway. And then now how do you clean it? Like if you want to clean your pad on the fly with a flat foam pad, you could take like a nylon brush, a toothbrush, a pad clean brush, and just go scrape, 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 and get back to work quickly. With something like this, you'd have to dig your brush into each one of these little valleys amongst all these hills. It would be very time consuming, and you'd be very ineffective at trying to clean a pad like this. So for that reason, you can count me as a member of the Flat Pad Society. I've always been a big fan of just KISS, keep it simple, Simon. A flat surface of the foam pad just makes the most sense to me. That's my personal thoughts. There's a lot of great designs on the market. I will tell you, I was still at Meguiar's when they introduced the Solo line. So a lot of people remember the Solo line.
Those.
It was 1 chemical and 4 pads. The 4 pads were 2 wool pads, a yellow one and a maroon one. One was for polishing, one was for cutting. And then 2 foam pads, a black one and a yellow one, using the same basic foam formulas as these. Only the marketing department decided to put these diamond or these X-cut grooves into the face of the pad. So I, as a member of the Flat Pad Society, I'm in this marketing meeting and I look to the marketing guy, I can't remember his name, I say, what's the whole idea behind these diamond cuts in the face of the pad? And I thought he was going to give me an answer that would just like totally make sense that I just didn't know about. But instead, he completely let me down. He says, well, we're just changing things up. We've always, we've always had a flat pad. Now we're just changing things up. And so my question is, where are those pads today? They didn't work. You know, it might have looked cool, but it's just not a functional design to the pad, especially since the grooves were fairly deep. Anyway, Yancey, you can have your camera case foam back. Okay, so a little bit about the Meguiar's pads. The 3M pads, since I have these here, let me just talk about these real quick. The nice thing about the 3M pads is these are actually color-coded to their finessant line. So the white is for the compound, the blue is for the black is for the polish, the number 2 polish, and then the light blue is much softer. That's for their finessing polish. So it kind of makes it easy to say. There's a little banner on the bottles. You can actually look at it and go, oh, this is for that, this one's for that bottle, and this one's for that bottle. And later on in life, Griot's kind of borrowed that idea for their Boss system. I do not think they make these in smaller sizes like 5 and 6. These are 8-inch pads. I do think they make them in 3 inches and they sell those like as headlight correction pads. I could be wrong. I don't stay up on the 3M stuff too often. Okay, over here we've got the Rupes. The thing I like about Rupes is they make some of the best tools on the market. Everybody knows they're famous for their long stroke, free spinning, random orbital polishers. They make some of the best sanders, the Scorpio line. And who doesn't love the Rupes Nano long neck for me, but the short neck get the same kind of job done. So some amazing tools. So that's usually, if you say the word Rupes, people think of the tool. But they also make their own pads, they make their own backing plates, and they make their own chemicals. So it's a very all-encompassing line, so hats off to them. But the thing I really like about it is a few years ago, they introduced a new pad, and it was called the Contour Profile. And I meant to look up when I wrote my first review for these, but I probably have like 5 or 6 reviews. I absolutely loved these pads. And what that means, Contour Profile, is you got the face of the pad, then it's kind of cut out back here on the sides. And the purpose of this is so if you're ever up on edge or pushing on it, the foam actually spreads outward and backward, or does what we call mushrooms back. And the benefit to that is if you have, well, I'll just go ahead and use this one. If you just had a pad that's completely cylindrical, so you have the face, you have the side, it's the complete difference. When you push on the edge or go up on edge, the foam tends to twist in, not go flush backwards. So not a super big deal, but I've been in situations where I've gone up on edge with gear-driven orbitals and rotaries, and without that contour profile like you see here, you actually decrease the size of the pad, but sometimes you could risk running the backing plate or the edge of the foam pad into the paint and scar it. So really love the design of this. Of course, these foam pads come in a coarse blue. This is their new pad. I love this teal color. I think everybody does. This is their intermediate. Can be used for both cutting and polishing depending on the hardness of the paint. Then they got their fine cut, which is the yellow, and then they got their ultra fine, which is the white. They come in American sizes, that's 6-inch, 5-inch, and 3-inch. I think it's 180 millimeters, 170, and 140. I could be wrong on that. They also offer these in 3-inch, 2-inch, and 1-inch for the micro tools. So a very encompassing line of foam pads to tackle anything you're working on. Now, like Meguiar's, they also introduced their own microfiber pads. So they've got the DA Fine, and you can tell that because it's got a yellow foam interface between the Velcro and the face of the pad where the microfiber's at. And then they got the Ultra Fine, which has the white foam. So pretty easy to kind of look at these and tell right away which pad it is. And one thing I like about Rupes is, and I don't have any inside secrets about how they make things, but one thing I do know is everything they make is very, very high quality. And that would include the fibers themselves. So super high quality microfiber pads. And then they also introduced these, and these are some amazing pads. I'm a huge fan of both of these. I've probably used the coarse DA pad the most. This is a wool pad, very thin, and works great on orbital polishers. Just a super pad to give you that extra cut if you're working on hard paint or any paint that just has deeper swirls, scratches, water spots, and oxidation. And these also come in the same sizes that you find in the foam pad. So in American sizes, that would be 6'5", 3, 2, and 1. So something for everybody. And then something I just wanted to point out is years ago, actually it was in 2015, I did write this book for Rupes. It was all about their tools and their pads at the time, and their chemicals. They had a complete line at that point. And one of the things I just like to point out is if I go to page 34, I talked about how I met the engineer for Rupes, Marco de Inca. And with my background knowledge on the really thick pads that were on the market at the time, I asked Marco, who came to one of my detailing classes, I asked him, how come your pads are so thick? And I thought he was going to say for extra cushion or for longevity, but actually his answer was a lot more intelligent than that. His answer was, well, here at Rupes, we design everything to be ergonomically correct and safe for people to use for hours as you're buffing out a car. And that meant tuning the pad to the backing plate, to the tool, to make it run smooth in low vibration. And on page 39, I actually introduced this topic that's called the air test. And what the air test is, if you took one of their tools and turned it on, let me put this on low speed and just turn it on, just kind of hold it just like that. Right now, I can feel this thing vibrating a little bit, okay? And of course, you should never run a tool in the air. You're supposed to put the pad against the paint and buff out a car. But as soon as I slap the correct size pad to the backing plate, center it up as good as I can, and now I turn it on and lock it, and now that's smooth, okay? Zero vibration. So it vindicated what Marco de Inca told me, that they designed their pads. It's not just a pad, it's part of a system. Okay, so the pads are tuned and designed to work with the backing plates, which have a certain amount of weight and girth to them, to the tool itself for a smooth operation. And that makes it nice for us. And that's one of the reasons I think so many people like the Rupes line, is the tools are just so well balanced, low vibration. They're just a pleasure to use. And in fact, just to note, when I started doing research on the Rupes line to write this book, I picked the title very specifically. It says the Rupes Bigfoot Paint Polishing System. Okay, it's not a line of tools, not a lot of pads, it's not a line of products, it's a system. Very well thought out system too. Okay, down here, we have got the Buff and Shine line of pads, a very extensive line of pads. And I said, before I go talk about these, let me just interject this. If anybody wants to see any of these tools in action, I pretty much got any polisher you could think of, and I've got this really cool 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado. It's a fully restored car. It's a show winning car. The problem is the paint's completely swirled out and filled full of scratches. So it's here to get prepped for a car show that actually takes place December 4th. So I can show any of these things on that car on any tool you could probably name. Okay, so let's take a look at the Buff and Shine pads. So this is something that caught my eye as soon as they launched these. This is called the Edge Guard pads. Let me grab a little bit larger one. And what what this does is it's kind of like the design of the Rupes pad. So you've got the face of the pad, but they've carved out the foam in the back. So again, it can flex backward or mushroom backwards versus twisting in, depending on how you're using the tool. And then the back of this has this rigid plastic beveled edge here that helps you to center that pad exactly into their backing plates, but also a lot of other backing plates on the market. So one of the key things about polishing, especially with machine polishing, is you want to get that pad as centered, as perfect as you can. Not only will the pad in the process be more effective, removing defects, but also make the tool be smoother as you're using it. So for that, they got this coarse blue, they got the maroon foam cutting, they've got the blueberry, which is just an amazing pad. This is called a heavy polishing. And kind of like the intermediate pad over here, you can use this to cut and finish on some paints. And usually, if you're finishing with a pad that has a little sharpness to it, it's usually a harder paint, not a softer paint. But when you do run into softer paints, they have a remedy for that. So they've also got the yellow, they've got the white, and then the very soft black foam finishing pads. And I have, for the most part, at least at this point in time, because I'm always open to improvements, at this time I've changed our classes over when it comes to foam pads and orbitals and rotaries. We have switched over to the Rupes, or the Buff and Shine edge guard pads. By the way, just so you know, because I'm kind of a word guy, edge guard is one word. So if you go to search it for that, don't put a space in there. It's edge guard pads. So that's their pads, great pads. Like a lot of these pads on the table, you get a lot of life out of them. It's important, of course, to clean your pads. And don't torture your pads. Years and years and years ago, I wrote this article called "How Many Pads Does It Take to Buff Out a Car?" And the reason I wrote it was because the company I worked for at the time, they sold a lot of polisher kits, okay? So that way, if you bought a polisher, you'd have the pads to use with it. But you didn't get all the pads you need. You just got enough to kind of get you going. The thing is a lot of people get that kit and they go, okay, this came with a foam cutting pad, a foam polishing pad, and a foam finishing pad. Obviously, that's all I need to buff out a car. So they would slap on a pad. Of course, they put their product on, put it on the hood of the car, turn the polisher on, and keep in mind that for that brief moment, when you put the product, like 3 pea-sized drops here, and you put that against the paint before you turn the pad on, for a brief moment, that product's all going into the pad. You keep doing that, pretty soon you got what's called a saturated pad. It's wet, it's full of product, and it ain't gonna rotate very well on a free spinning tool because of the extra weight from the liquids. Also, liquid inside a foam pad retains, it holds in the heat generated by the backing plate and the downward pressure and that violent oscillating action. So if someone bought the kit and had 3 pads and they go to, say, a Honda, 4-door Honda Accord, and they want to take and use a compound and do the first paint correction step with 1 pad, by the time you're done doing the hood and the fender, that pad is saturated. Now you're pressing that to all the rest of the body panels. It's wet, it's holding in heat, it's got this violent oscillating action, and the pad blows up, or you lose the adhesive that holds the Velcro onto the back of the pad because you're punishing the pad. So, in my opinion, and I know some guys don't agree with me, when you're buffing out cars using foam pads, you really need, for a heavy correction, say you're going to compound every panel on a 2-door car. A 2-door car has 9 panels. You would want 9 pads, or at least 6 pads. You want to be able to switch pads often to maintain good pad rotation, good pad oscillation, and to not punish your pads so your pad investment lasts longer over time. As a pad becomes wet with product, it loses its cut, okay? So when you fill a pad, so here's their maroon medium cut pad, has a sharpness to it, but when things get wet, they become softer. Think about you. If you sit in a hot tub, your skin doesn't get harder, it gets softer. So as thing gets wet, they become softer, so you lose cut. So these people that bought the kit, and they got 3 pads, 1 cutting, 1 polishing, 1 finishing, and they're trying to do the entire process of 1 pad, not only are they punishing and torturing the pad, and it's not gonna last very long, but it's gonna take them longer because once that pad becomes soft, it's not gonna cut as well. So they're gonna notice, oh look, the swirls and scratches aren't coming out very easily. Well, it's because you're using the same pad, dude. That's why I've never been I love pad washers. I've got the Grit Guard, I've got the Lake Country back there. But for me, a pad washer is something that you use at the end of the day to clean your pads to get them ready for the next day. If you take it to a pad washer and you clean it, you're getting it wet. You just made a cutting pad soft. You turned a cutting pad into a polishing pad. Everybody has their own opinion on that. But for me, a pad washer is something you use at the end of the project, not clean the pad, and then take and put that pad back on the tool and go back to work. Your cutting pad is now a finishing pad. Okay, so now they have an extensive line of microfiber and micro wool pads. I got to be honest, I have never been much of a microfiber pad guy. If I need to cut, I put a wool pad on a rotary and follow with the orbital foam pad or with holograms. But just like in the Rupes line, I mean, everything Buff and Shine does is just top notch. It's VIP. It's the best of the best. So the fibers are good, the foam's good, the adhesive's good, the Velcro attachment's really strong, so you get a lot of life out of them. I know down here these are real popular because a lot of paints you can cut and finish. They call these the Oreo pads because they're black and white like an Oreo. And then they all come in just a great variety of sizes everywhere from the larger wool pads up to 8 inches, maybe even larger, all the way down to 1-inch pads. So a great selection of pads from Buff and Shine. I do have some of their wool pads here, and I thought I would just share something with you. In my detailing classes, the first tool I teach you how to use is a rotary polisher. Now, I know some of my friends in the industry don't think that's a good idea, but I like to share this. There's an old saying that goes like this: use the right tool for the job, okay? And sometimes the right tool is a rotary polisher. This thing's so swirled out, I'm probably going to start with a wool pad on a rotary just because I can get those swirls and scratches out really fast. Instead of making multiple section passes, I can just buff till I see them gone and move on to a new area. But when it comes to using a rotary buffer, there's different types of pads at the market, and I'm going to tell you what I like. This pad here has a 1.25 inch long fiber length. I think they call that the pile length. Down here's another pad. This has about a 3/4 inch pile length. And the difference is the shorter the pile length, the harder the pad, the harder it feels as you're buffing, and the harder it is to clean, no matter if you're using compressed air or with a spur. Longer fiber pads buff smoother and they clean smoother. So for me, my minimum pad fiber length is I like 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches. But 1.25 inches is kind of that sweet spot for wool cutting pads when doing rotary work. So, but anyway, at least you got some great options here from the Buff and Shine company. Okay, over here, just to be very thorough in this presentation, these are some generic foam pads ordered off of Amazon. The back, it just says
Amazon
Hero.
Buffing Hero.
Buffing Hero. And I don't remember if I saw a color code in the website page for these, but I can do what I just shared up there. I can take my hand and rub it across the face of this green pad, and that's very sharp. If I compress it, it's very dense. That is a foam cutting pad. Let me check out these two. Okay, so the yellow is polishing. There's still a little sharpness here. Compresses a little bit easier. And this black pad, it's soft, and Yancey could put his makeup on in the morning with it. It's that
Question.
soft. Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard you say it. I remember we used to do the blow test into the thing. Is there much
I will
close
cover
up?
that. Thanks for bringing that. I actually had that written down up here.
Okay.
Okay, so I covered that in my second how-to book. And let's see, it's on page 59. And this was published in, I think, 2010. And 2011, and Yancey did all the graphical layout. I took the majority of the pictures. There's a lot of pictures that are from Yancey, but I did write all the copy. But one of the things I explained in here was the difference between open cell or closed cell, or in their technical terms, reticulated or non-reticulated. And the difference is a reticulated pad. A reticulated pad, when you reticulate the foam, that means you did something to it. And in this case, what it means is, I don't know how this works, but they blow the foam out, and foam has a cell structure, and it's
membrane.
got
That's what it's called.
what?
Like a membrane.
Yeah, it has a membrane. So it has a cell structure, and then it has a membrane. And when they reticulate it, when they reticulate it, what they're doing is they're blowing out all the membranes. So think of a house with windows and busting out the windows. Now you've got an open cell or a reticulated pad. If you don't do anything with foam, that's non-reticulated. You did it, you didn't do anything to it. Now you've got a closed cell foam pad. And I actually don't have any up here.
Do they even make them anymore? I don't hear much about
I know
them
some companies do make them.
Do they?
But the way you could tell real easily, as Yancey alluded to, is you just take and blow on them. You put your lips right on there, see if you can easily blow air into it. That's open cell. I can blow air into it. Now, if it was non-reticulated, so you didn't do anything to it, you didn't blow out the membranes, it would be very hard to blow air into it. Now, the sales side of this was, the theory being, because if you had a closed cell, this isn't closed cell, but if you had one, what this means is if you put your compound polish or wax on here, it'd be a lot harder for that product to get into the foam because the membranes are intact. So the idea is it traps it between the paint and the face of the pad, and you don't saturate your pad, you get more use out of the product. Those are all great things. They sound good on paper. The problem is when you put your product on the face of the pad and you've got that, in the case of an orbital polisher, you have what I call a violent. I mean, you take any of the orbital polishers of the market and turn them up to 6 and press them a little bit. That is a violent rotating and oscillating action for hours, okay? And you get heat. But what happens is, no matter how close cell it is, that product works its way into the pad. Now, here's the flip side of that coin. Because it's got the membrane intact, it's going to be a heck of a lot cleaner to get that stuff out. So I've never been a big fan of non-reticulated foam pads or closed cell foam pads. And the other thing is when they're non-reticulated, they have less tensile strength. So tensile strength means I can pull on this and it'll stretch. Okay, so it has a high tensile strength. Low tensile strength means when I pull on this, it would just rip. So that's the problem with the closed cell pad, is they rip up really easy. So over here, I've got some SPTA pads. Now, I do not have a lot of experience with anything from SPTA, except for recently I did an article on all the different polishing balls that you can attach to a drill and polish out things like aluminum wheels. And I ordered an SPT foam wheel buffing pad, and that seemed to work pretty good. And you can find the video and you can find the article for that on the Dr. Beasley's YouTube channel and the Dr. Beasley's blog. I have a lot of articles with videos embedded in them on the Dr. Beasley's blog, so check that out. But what's nice about this is you can order these off Amazon. You can get them in 3-inch, 2-inch, and 1-inch. You can get them in different grades of foam and, of course, different grades of microfiber fairly inexpensively. I have some out here. Here's a 2-inch, and here's a microfiber version. Here's a foam version. And the reason this is important is because of the Rupes Nano and things like this, the Flex Pixie, the PXE-80. And so now I use this stuff so often I can take and get this into something really tiny. I was working around emblems, doing thin panels. So one thing is to get the tool, but the other thing is you need a great selection of both foam and fiber pads depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So SPTA, check those out if you're looking for micro pads, or they make tools and all kinds of things. Over here are pads from Lake Country. Now, Lake Country pad manufacturing up in Wisconsin, kind of like Buff and Shine and Rupes, they make a lot of pads. They make a pad for everything. A lot of pads. I've been to the manufacturing plant a few times. I've taught some roadshow classes up there. I think I've taught 3 or 4 classes up there. Great people, great team of people up there, great manufacturing facilities they got there. And I got to see how the pads are made, both the wool pads and the foam pads. Very interesting, complex operation.
Do you remember how to pronounce the name of the town?
Oconomowoc. Oconomowoc. Yeah, it took me a long time to not only say it correctly, but type it correctly. Okay, so in their pad line, let me just kind of run through and share some of their pads. This is one of the more popular pads for tools like the Flex Beast. This is called the Force. Okay, so it's the Force pad. And they have a very slight taper to them. The good news is they come in, I think, 5 different flavors. You got a gray, really heavy cutting. You got an orange cutting. You got yellow polishing, or white polishing. No, white cutting. So you got the gray, which is the most aggressive. I have one right here. Here's one in a 5-inch. So they got the gray. Then you got the yellow, the orange, the white, the black, and the red, which is a very soft. Back when we used car waxes, you'd use this to apply a machine to apply a wax to your car. But the Force pads are very popular, and if you notice, these are very thick. And that's not a negative thing when you're using a gear-driven orbital. Gear-driven orbital is going to tear it up, man. It doesn't matter if you got a thin pad or a small pad, because it's gear-driven. It's going to rotate and oscillate no matter what. So as I like to say, it'll turn and churn any pad. But by having a thicker pad, you have a pad that'll conform to curves, and you got a lot more wear. You'll get a lot more use out of it because it's got so much mass there. So that is the Lake Country Force pads. Now over here, I've got what they call the HDO pads. So the HDO, the H stands for heavy, or HDO, heavy duty orbital. And this is really some ingenious stuff they came up with. These were introduced after Rupes had introduced the whole concept and the tools called long stroke orbital polishers. And of course, then a lot of people jumped on that wagon and copied them and brought out their own versions of this. But the thing is when you've got a tool spinning a pad in a circle, and now it's making this huge orbit, and you bring that up to high speed, that's a very violent action. And a foam without this, with this gray component right here, the foam can kind of move in a lateral direction. So what they did is they added this stiffer gray foam right after the Velcro backing and before they put the actual working surface on there. It stiffened up the pad and it keeps that pad tight and intact and not moving all over the place when you're high speed with orbital. So that's called the HDO, heavy duty orbital. Make sure I got them right. Now, they also have the SDO. Now, if you look at these two, and I'll hold two up together, the difference here is you can see the gray foam interface between the working side and the Velcro side, but over here it's missing. These are called SDO, or standard duty. And I'm just going to take a guess that these would be more in tune for short stroke polishers. For example, the Porter Cable, Griot's Garage G9, any of the tools out there that are a shorter orbit stroke length. So that's the SDO. I have those there. And then they also got the CCS. Now this is actually a patented design. CCS, if you look, you see these little divots or dimples here. What that stands for is collapsed cell structure. CCS, collapsed cell structure. And I'm not sure, but I think what they do is they got a machine that comes down and heats this and it kind of presses it in. It causes a little bit of a skin in there. And the benefit to this is it reduces the total working surface area for smoother operation, and it kind of holds some product in there, and as you're buffing, it kind of lets it kind of come out, you know, at a very paced time. So you always have a nice amount of product on the surface that you're working. You never get to that dry buff, which can cause micromarring. So that is the CCS pad. Now down here in front, you can see I've got some fiber pads. And the same kind of thing, just like the Rupes, the Meguiars, and the Buff and Shine, they've got the micro wools. And you can see this has a blue foam, so this tells me this is probably a cutting pad, a stiffer foam, a more aggressive, very tight-knit pad here for using it on orbital polishers. So you can probably use this on a rotary also for doing major paint correction. These are really popular. These are what they call the purple foamed wool pads, or PFWs. And the way this was explained to me was you have the wool fibers here, which are very fine, and then they're encapsulated or surrounded by foam particles, which makes these very soft and plush, but also does this, because remember I said this earlier, fibers are a form of abrasive. So now you got something that's going to help to cut with your compound or polish, but because of the foam, it kind of reduces that cut. It makes it more gentle. So sometimes you can cut and finish with a pad just like this. They also have a darker, more aggressive version. For the life of me, the blue ones, I can't remember what they're called, but maybe it's just the blue foamed wool pads, the BFWs. Over here, we've got their version of the microfiber pads. Over the years, I've seen them come out with a lot of different styles. I was at AutoGeek when they introduced their first one. They had really thin foams, really thick foam backings on them, thin foam backings, thick foam backings. And now they've just got it kind of down to the same thickness of foam, but you can see one's blue and one's orange. This would be the cutting, this would be the finishing. And this also means the microfiber itself, one's more aggressive, maybe a shorter fiber length. The finishing was maybe a little bit longer fiber length, less aggressive for that final finish if you're using microfiber on medium to hard paints. The problem I always find with working with any brand or any type of fiber pad on soft paints is, again, the fibers, because they're a form of abrasive. Each one of the fibers on the surface will tend to be cutting, so it's leaving a silk cut, and that'll show up as micromarring. So fiber pads on orbital polishers just tend to be better suited for medium to hard paints, not always soft paints. But you always want to do a test spot to find out. Now, when we come over here, these are a brand new marine line of wool pads they've introduced, and I'm fortunate that they sent me some to test. I've used these in my classes, and this is their more aggressive, I'm trying to think of the name, they call it the Master Marine, and that's one word also. The Master Marine wool cutting pad, and then they got the Master Marine wool finishing pad. So you have two different options depending on what you're trying to do on a gel coat boat. They also introduced a brand new line of foam pads for the marine line, and they included this teal colored foam interface, kind of like the HDOs have. Where'd my HDO go? Here it is, the same kind of idea. So it gives it a little more stoutness or stiffness. And this is white. Again, like a lot of times, a white pad is thought of as a foam polishing pad. So not aggressive, not really soft. But you feel this has some cut to it.
I can hear that from here.
This is a very sharp pad. And that kind of brings me to something I just wanted to share. Then they also have this blue, which should be foam polishing. And they also introduced it in a flat pad for guys like me that like a flat pad surface. But one of the things I shared years ago when I wrote a boat detailing book was that, and I've never been able to find anybody that could explain why, but when I first started, I started detailing boats in the 70s, but I taught my first official boat detailing class in the year 2013. So being that in about a few weeks, it's 2025, that's 12 years now. But when I wrote the book, what I found out from teaching classes, real hands-on classes on, usually what I bring is large center console boats that are in really bad shape so I can teach the most technique. But here's what I found out. After you sand and cut the gel coat, if you come back with a soft foam polishing pad on factory gel coat, it'll tend to dull the finish down that you created with the wool pad on a rotary polisher. It'll dull it down. And you can look at that and scratch your head and go, what did I do wrong? So you didn't do nothing wrong. You're just taking a car detailing mentality and applying it to a boat detailing mentality, and that doesn't always work. But what I also found out is in my boat detailing, as a boat detailing instructor now since 2013, is that I've had 2 times where boats have come in where they've been re-gel coated. So that means they've been repainted, kind of like you repaint a car, only instead of spraying paint, they spray gel coat. And what I found out is anytime someone resprays a gel coat, they tend to be softer than the factory gel coat where it popped out of the mold. And so then they do like a soft foam polishing pad, or not like finishing, but a foam, right in that sweet spot, not cutting, not finishing, but a foam polishing pad. So that's another reason when you're gonna detail a boat, you always want to start out just like with a car. You want to do a test spot. So in one spot on the hull, you want to test out everything you're going to do in one place and make sure you're getting the results you hope and dream about before you buff out the entire boat. And that's called a marine or boat or gel coat test spot. And of course, we teach that in all our boat detailing classes. And I cover that in that book, which is no longer in print. Okay, over here, Griot's Garage. Now, the cool thing about Griot's is a whole bunch of the guys that work there at Griot's worked together with me at Meguiar's. And so they didn't hire people that didn't know what they're doing. They hired guys that knew what they were doing. They know a lot, like Rod Kraft and Jeff Brown and Doug Hodge, who's since retired. But these guys are smart. And a few years ago, when Jeff Brown from Meguiar's joined the Griot's team, he told me a story that he told Richard Griot, the owner, the founder of Griot's Garage, that he'd be happy to come work for him, but he wanted to have an honest relationship with them. If you got great products, I'm going to tell you. If you got some products that aren't very good, I'm going to tell you that too. And Jeff is actually the guy that got them to reformulate all their polishes. Originally, Griot's had these polishes. There was number 1, 2, 3, and 4, kind of like a lot of generic polishes. Just had a number. I think the most aggressive was 4. The least aggressive was 1. I could have that backwards. And I had used those, and to tell you the truth, they weren't very good. The abrasive technology just was not that good. Did it work? Yeah, it worked. But Jeff worked with a new chemist that they brought on the team, and they came out with what they call the Boss creams. And there's 4 different Boss creams. And those use a synthetic abrasive technology that's just freaking amazing. But when they created the Boss creams, they put a banner, a colored banner. They're a red bottle, and then they have just the same color, a banner or a little, I forget what they call that. What would you call that in marketing?
Bar?
A bar? Yeah, like a bar that was color-coded to the pad. So if you had their fast correction cream, it had a little white bar on there, and hey, I use that with the white pad. And of course, you can mix and match, but it was a good way to get started if you were new to polishing. You could color match the pad to the product to the process. The thing I really like about the Griot's pads is when they introduce these, look how thin they are.
Thin is in.
I wrote this article called Thin is In, and that came out in 2010. And back then, all the pads in the market were really thick. In fact, there was a pad that came out of Germany.
Oh, I remember that.
It was orange. It was called the Swirl Buster. And it was probably like 3 inches thick, a 5-inch orange pad about 3 inches thick. I saw one when we were at Automechanica.
Yeah, Automechanica.
And we went to this buffing pad. So finally, I found where this thing came from. The thing is that it wouldn't work for the reasons I shared way up there at the beginning of the tables. That thick, super thick foam pad, it absorbed all the energy coming out of the tool and dissipated it. And that means that you just didn't have any pad rotation or pad oscillation. And of course, as it becomes full of liquid, that thick foam, it got even worse than that. So we went from this extreme, super thick pad to these thinner pads. The first one was introduced by Lake Country. It was called the Hydrotech pad in 2010. Meguiar's introduced their foam buffing discs in 2014. And I stick in my notes. And then Lake Country introduced a pad they called the Thin Pro in 2017, which was even thinner. And so when Jeff went to work and he redesigned all their pads, a lot of their pads were a little bit thicker like this. You can tell this is quite a bit difference in pad thickness. part of the Boss system is using the Boss tools, which are all free spinning, random orbital, long stroke polishers. And to help maintain excellent pad rotation, they reduce the mass of the pad and create these very thin pads. And they also work very good. And just like all these pads on here, these are a quality pad. You get a lot of life out of them. But the thing to remember is don't punish your pads. If you're going to be doing heavy correction, have more than one pad. You know, let your budget be your guide. But the thing about buying more pads to buff out a car like this is that you may spend more money up front initially because you bought, say, 6 to maybe a dozen pads, but they'll last you longer over the lifetime of the pads.
And you'll get done with your car faster.
And you'll get done with the car faster because wet pads do not cut well. Okay, they also introduced some microfiber pads. I've only got 2 of them here, but the same kind of idea. Fibers are a form of abrasive. These are super high quality on medium to hard paints. You can cut and finish. On softer paints, you might want to stick with the foam. And these other 2 pads are just kind of more of a generic pad just for use with just any kind of orbital polisher. You can actually pick these up at AutoZone. This orange is like a heavy polishing, light cutting, and then this is like a waxing pad. And I think there's also a black pad in that line too. They didn't have it when I stopped by AutoZone, so I didn't get it. Over here, I just wanted to do a shout out to my friend Lewis in Brazil. Okay, so I was at SEMA a few weeks ago. Yancey, you were out there.
I was.
Great show. I was showing the Dr. Beasley's products and also all the 24-volt flex cordless polishers. By the way, up in the Dr. Beasley's blog, you'll see my full review for each tool, 3 different articles, 3 different tools, and 3 different videos where I do a box opening, show you them, and then put them in action. And I buffed out a 19, what was that? It was a Pontiac, a 1965 Pontiac SJ, Special Edition Grand Prix. Totally swirled out, and I used that car to do what I call torture testing on the batteries. So when it comes to cordless battery, the first question everybody has is, how long does the battery last? Well, if you turn it on and buff, and then you stop and wipe off, and then you turn it on and buff, that's not really a true test of how long the battery lasts. So what I did in these videos and for this article was I turned it on and never turned it off. And I just ran it like I would really use the tool. I really buffed out the car, and then I had a clock. Well, that clock up there kind of taped onto the windshield, and I would take a picture of it when I started at high noon, and then I would just time how long it went. I just gave an honest answer. Some people were kind of let down on how long they lasted. Some people were impressed. But you just got to remember, in the real world, nobody buffs like that. You buff a section, you wipe off, you fiddle with your phone, you get a drink of water, you use the bathroom, you talk to your girlfriend, then you go back to buffing. So all of a sudden you're getting an hour out of a battery. And that's how most people buff out. So take it for what it's worth. But to that point, while I was there in the Flex booth, a gentleman named Lewis came by. He has his own line called Detailer. And he gave me one of these pads to test out. And I haven't tested it out yet, Lewis, because I'm saving it for another project. But I'm also hoping this year to go down to the 10th anniversary of Detailer Fest and work with the owner of that show, Romulo, and all the people that are going to be on. This is a huge trade show. It's kind of like the SEMA for the detailing world in Brazil. And that takes place, I think, the 3rd weekend of June this year. So anyway, I just wanted to do a shout out to my friend Lewis and say thank you. I know that when you're traveling so far to bring stuff to give away to people, you know, it just fills your suitcase up, and that's a little bit of a burden. So I appreciate what you did for me. You also gave me a really cool cap. So thank you, Lewis, and I hope to see you down there at the Detailer Fest.
And if your suitcase is heavy in June, I don't know why. I might be stowed away. You never know.
You could be my Sherpa.
There you go. I'll be your Sherpa.
Okay, so over here, I wanted to include these too because, you know, it's so easy to run down to Harbor Freight and get a jigsaw, power saw, you know, tarp, whatever you might need. But they also have their own tools out now and a line of buffing pads. And the interesting thing about these buffing pads is these, in my opinion, what they appear to be is a German pre-polymer foam, which is an exact copy of the original Rupes pads. And same size, same diameter, same thickness, same color scheme, everything. So while Rupes went away from that design, somebody else has kind of picked it up. And now this is Velocity from SM Arnold. And if you go down to Harbor Freight, it used to be the Harbor Freight brand, but I was down there yesterday morning just to pick up some fresh pads for this video. They were completely out. I asked them, hey, where's your pads? And they said, well, we're rebranding them under the Grant detailing line. So there's a lot of Grant. There's Grant stools, Grant this, Grant towels. Now it's going to be the Grant pads. But hey, you know what? The thing is they work. This is the very aggressive blue coarse foam pad for cutting. The green is also fairly coarse. It's also a kind of a cutting, not really a polishing pad. Yellow would be their polishing, and this white pad would be their finishing. And there's been times where I've been in a bind and I needed pads now. I didn't have time to order them. I didn't have what I needed. Run down to Harbor Freight, grabbed them, got the car detailed. That's what's important. At the end of the day, we got to find a way to get to shiny. Then over here, I just wanted to share, I got a couple other wool pads here. This is actually a wool pad made by SM Arnold for Harbor Freight. They call this the Tougher Buffer pad. And then this is one by SM Arnold called Advantage. And both of them seem to be fairly good quality pads. This has what I would call a very short fiber length. It's about 3/4 of an inch. So that's going to make this pad harder to buff with and harder to clean. Not that those are big deals to a lot of people. I just prefer 1.5 inch, 1.25 fiber length, smoother on me, easier to clean with the spur as you're working around a car. This one here appears to be about 1 inch long fiber length. So you always want to take and pay attention to the fiber length of your wool pads and try to pick something that's in the 1.25 to 1.5 inch.